Today, we're going to talk about some of the emotional triggers that influence some of our financial decision making. We'll talk about fear, greed, scarcity. Tune in. This is going to be a great episode.
Welcome to All Things Financial. Trey Peterson and
Yelisei Coots.
And today we've got a really interesting topic: fear, scarcity, and greed, the emotional triggers behind financial mistakes. And I think as a wealth manager for the last 12 plus years, one of the biggest things that we see a lot of mistakes is not necessarily in the market. It's not always with the investments or the products, but it's emotions, whether people get greedy or whether they get fearful. And so I think one of the greatest things that we do for people is we help them create a plan, stick to a plan, and not lose 3-4 decades of good decisions in one or two bad decisions.
And I don't think it's a failure of intelligence typically. I think it's an emotional reaction typically that gets you in a bad spot. And I think that a lot of times, whenever you consider some of the decisions that people make, when it comes to these emotional triggers, a lot of times what you're doing, you're trying to solve for a temporary problem, but your solution ends up having permanent consequences. And we'll talk about how the market functions and sometimes missing out on the best days and some of the effects that could have just by making one temporary solution where you're not doing anything bad or wrong. Sometimes you think you're doing the most conservative thing, but it ends up having big consequences.
One of the things I'm a big believer of, a lot of you know I wrestled for one of the top wrestling schools in the nation. And really what we did really well is we outworked everybody and we stuck to the basics. And so we recently hired a speaking coach and said, hey, for the class that we teach, look at how can we get better? How can we better effectively communicate with others? And his name's Caleb. And Caleb said something really interesting to me. He said, you know what? He said, a lot of the times, the thing that I'm actually helping people do better is think about themselves better. He said, because most people, the reason that they struggle or suffer in their speaking abilities is because they're struggling with their confidence.
And that comes through.
And it comes through. So he said, if I can help you on the confidence end and help you pinpoint the things that are causing you to not speak confidently, by helping with your confidence, I can help you be a better speaker. And I would say as an advisor, it's kind of the same thing. Yeah. What we see a lot is you have really intelligent people that end up making decisions that are based on their emotions. And maybe it's because they've spent 30 to 40 plus years getting a paycheck, adding to retirement, never touching that money. And now all of a sudden that feeling of losing control of having income coming in, I think you can decide that, hey, I've saved enough. We've worked hard for 40 years and you can walk in faith, or you can live in fear and you can have a scarcity mindset that causes you to make bad emotional responses and decisions.
Yeah, that's true. Well, let's jump right in. Let's go into fear right away. So what's one example of, at least in the context of what we do, where fear is on full display and people are making decisions based on that?
I think one of the things that we see people do is the last 5 years, the stock market's been very volatile. Mm-hmm. And how many times have we heard people say over the last 5 years, the market can't continue to go on forever. And while we agree with some of that, they sell off and they end up moving into something super safe. Yeah. And then the last 5 years has been the best 5 years of our lifetime.
Yeah, with some hiccups, but it's those hiccups that have caused all the problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the volatility is what makes people nervous. Yeah. But where we see a lot of mistakes is where people sell off when the market's low, or they decide, hey, I'm going to move into cash and I'm going to get back at the right time. Well, what's the right time? Yeah. And it's pretty tough to time the market. So fear is a problem. The second one, though, I would say is scarcity, where you and I, and we go back to fear, but on the scarcity side, we run into a lot of people that go, hey, if I have enough to stay retired, why don't I just protect everything that I have? Which reminds me of the book of Matthew, not to get too scriptural, where they've got the 1 talent, the 3 talent, and the 5 talent guy. And the king borrows them each a talent, and he comes back, and the 3 talent guy doubled his talents. The 5 talent guy doubled his talents. And the 1 talent guy goes, I'm going to bury this to prove to the king that I protected what he gave me. And when the king came back, the 5 talent guy goes, look, I've got 10 talents. Yeah. And what did the king say? Well done, thy good and faithful servant. And the guy with the 3 talents came back. He goes, I've got 6 talents. And he said, well done. You took a risk and it paid off. And the guy with 1 said, look, master, I buried the talent. Nothing is lost, and I've kept it for you. And he said, thy wicked and lazy servant. At least you could have put it in the bank to earn a little interest. And I would say that we see that. Yeah. We see people that they end up getting this scarcity mindset. They end up living in fear. And instead of continuing to grow their money, even if they become, more conservative, they move it to something so extreme out of fear, and it costs them, significant returns, or what I would say is significant peace of mind.
Yeah, and I think where fear kind of comes and goes depending on the volatility or other circumstances, maybe you're looking at certain headlines and that's what's causing some of the fear. I think scarcity, it's a little sneakier than that, because I think that scarcity is like this feeling or this mood that tends to persist, right? People just kind of, it's not necessarily about how much money they have. It's about how they feel about the money they have. And that's really difficult to work with because, people that have a scarcity mindset, it really doesn't matter how much their circumstances change. We can show them like, hey, you're not at risk at running out of money, but they're making decisions based on the scarcity mindset. And they're not even enjoying like the positive and the good moments that happen in life. Yeah. But one thing I'll say to the fear thing, we had a couple of great examples that kind of showcased this, what we're talking about precisely. March 12th, 2020, we had the COVID scare. So we had this guy, he was actually a prospect. He was an Indian gentleman, and he spent, I think, 270 days a year, typically on average, traveling to China, to Southeast Asia. And I think in January of 2020, he came into our office.
Met with me.
And he's telling me about all these things that he's seeing in terms of like the reporters in China, the warehouses where they're rounding people up. And he's telling, the picture he's painting, I'm like, oh, dear God, like this is coming here for us. And he goes, yeah, you guys better be ready for it. I remember coming out of that meeting and I shared some of the details with you. Actually, the funny thing was he said that they're rounding people up and they're exterminating them. So I'm like, I don't even know how much of this is credible, but he comes out of the office and we had another guy in the office who had like the flu or something. And like, he just looked like death. So this gentleman turns to me and goes, like that guy, they should exterminate him because he's like wheezing through the hallways and just like, But anyways, so after that meeting, you and I talked and I said, hey, I think this is going to impact how we do business. The way that he's talking about this, how it's spreading through the entire country and it's only a matter of time before it comes here.
Yeah, and I think my response was, that's never going to happen. That's ridiculous, LSA. I'm pretty sure America is going to be just fine.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, everything was closed down.
Yeah.
Libraries, colleges, universities couldn't leave your house.
One of the reasons why I bring it up is, when we're talking about fear-based decisions, on March 12th, that was like the worst day in the market in decades. And everyone was arguing, I don't know if you remember, they were like, is it going to be a W-shaped recovery? Is it going to be a Y-shaped recovery? And really, March 13th, I think the next day was one of the best days in the market that year. And anyone who panic sold, lost out. Everyone else got to ride the recovery. And I know you can't like take one specific example and say, hey, it's going to mirror other examples in the market. Take for instance, Liberation Day, right? April of 2025 last year was one of the worst days in the market. And we'll talk about, what we find is usually some of the best days in the market come shortly after some of the worst days. And that's why it's difficult to say, hey, obviously we're experiencing a correction. Let's move all of our money to the side. Why don't we sit in cash for a little bit? And then when the market rebounds, why don't we put the money back in? You can't do that because some of the best days are mixed in with some of the worst days. And we'll talk about what happens when you miss out on those a little bit later.
Well, I think one of the big values that you get out of having a coach in life or financial advisor or whatever field that you're in, somebody that you can look up to give you advice that's an outside perspective, is that for all of us, it's really easy to get emotional about our own finances, our own money. You think about it, you've spent decades, and whether you've saved a couple $100,000, a couple million, or 10 million, that money represents your life. All the days, all the hours, all the time that you didn't do things that maybe you would rather have been doing, all the effort, all the personal development, all the growth. And now this pile of money that you have, it has to last as long as you live. And the things that you don't know is, do I have a long-term care need coming up? Do we have expenses that are unforeseen? Yeah. Is the market going to peak at the right time? Or are we going to have a correction? So while there are a lot of variables, one of the things that we help people do, I think, is create a plan and then stick to the plan. And we don't just look at the best of days. We look to see what happens if one of those challenges happens. What happens if you lose a spouse and that income has gone early, that Social Security has gone early. And so one of the things that we would just say is, don't let fear run your life, but create a financial plan that when hard things come, we already know what we're going to do. So one of the things that John Maxwell, who's one of the leadership gurus, talks about often is pre-deciding. So what does it mean to pre-decide? Instead of saying, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll decide when I get there, it's deciding that if we have a market correction, here's what I'm going to do to not freak out, to not pull all of my money out at the bottom and then try to put it back in before it comes back. Yeah. And so one of the things I think that we do a really good job of, LSA, is we help people pre-decide if we have a correction, what amount of money do you want at risk? What amount do you want safe? Yeah. We have some clients that they could live off their Social Security, and so they have 80 or 90% stock. And then we've got clients that also could live just off Social Security, but they've got 50% of their money in safer things, because for them, the higher returns are not worth the potential loss, even though it wouldn't impact them their everyday. It would impact the way that they feel. And I think the biggest thing that we agree on is that whatever your plan is, the goal is financial peace. How do we create that?
And I think that over the last couple of years, it's been easier to make a fear-based decision than ever. And part of that is because of the higher interest rates, right? So right now, if you're looking at the market and it makes you feel a little uneasy, and especially, I mean, it's come down a little bit, but when interest rates were 4 and 5%, right? I mean, that's easy to make a fear-based decision because at least you're getting 4 to 5%.
Right.
Now, I would say when you compare that to what you could have gotten in the market when returns have been 10 to 15%, I mean, kind of over the last couple of years, we've been hitting some record highs in the market, and you look at how much you missed out on. That absolutely is the wrong decision, and it's a permanent decision, right? Those you're not going to recover those gains with 4 to 5% that you had in your money market funds, your treasuries, and I think that's partly part of the issue. And then the other part that people don't realize, this is not something that shows up on your statement, but it's just as big of a problem: inflation.
Right.
I'm just kind of doing the math. If you average a 4% rate of inflation, you basically say goodbye to half of your purchasing power in 20 years.
Well, I just showed a couple the other day. We were sitting down and I said at 3% inflation from age 65 to age 88, you're going to leave behind, it was like $1.3 million to your kids, grandkids, whoever you love the most.
Yeah.
But if inflation, instead of averaging 3% like it has the last decade, if it averages 4%, you guys actually end up running out of money in your 70s. And they're like, the only difference is a 1% inflation. I said, yeah, but it's 1% over 25 years, basically. So I think one of the things a lot of people don't understand is compounding interest, not just on an investment, but of inflation in the negative way, right? And so do we have a plan for that? Do we know what we're going to do if inflation does get out of control? And how do we invest to make sure that we have the upside and downsides of life covered in retirement?
On the flip side of that, like how do you like I know we've had clients that have actually, like for instance, back in the early 2000s when a lot of 401ks were really concentrated in company stock, right? And you've had a number of clients that had Enron stock in their portfolio, and they actually saw their 401ks evaporate overnight.
Well,
so like for them, like you look at, hey, what if that guy has a scarcity mindset, or maybe they're making some fear-based decisions, but they lived through that. I mean, how do you coach them through that scenario?
So if you deal with scarcity, I mean, you and I talk about it a lot as friends, is a lot of the scarcity mindset isn't just how you were born. It's based on how you were raised. Yeah. And so one of the things that I had growing up is I remember my parents not having a lot, but my parents were always stable. And so I think it helped me with an abundance mindset, where my mom grew up in a home that when she was 19, they lived in 21 different places. So an abundance mindset was not a thing. Even like just being okay was not a thing. And so abundance was so foreign to her that she couldn't think that way, even to the point where, 35 years later, she struggles a little bit about anytime my dad purchases something because she thinks, well, what if we lose it? And she hasn't lost anything in 35 years. So when I think about scarcity and abundance, one is you have to know, do I tend to be an abundance person or a scarcity person? And then you have to say, if scarcity is my natural default, what things do I need to listen to and what decisions do I need to make to move away from scarcity to abundance? Because one of the things I think we both agree is whatever your natural default is, one of the greatest things that we can do is lead ourselves away from our defaults. Yeah. Even in my life, I think about my natural defaults is my background is more sales and marketing. And if you look at people in sales and marketing, typically they're always chasing shiny objects. If I went with my natural defaults, I would probably switch careers every 6 to 10 months because I just saw like, what's next? What's out there? What's exciting? But one of the things I'm thankful for is that I had a father who said, hey, if you watch, the people that end up being successful are the people that end up being builders. And so he talks about like staying planted. And so one of the things I've had to do is I've had to fight the natural default of making changes all the time in my career and go, I'm going to have one thing in my life outside of my wife and kids that's also consistent and stable. And that's helped me go from my natural default of being a mover to just being a stable person. So if your natural default is scarcity, you need to get around people that have an abundance mindset. You need to read things around abundance. And if you're struggling in your finances and you're doing it alone, you need a financial advisor or a team of advisors that can help you think right about the things you're already thinking about.
It's difficult if you're always in survival mode. And even if you have good reason to feel that way, even if you've experienced some of these things, you need to work on changing your mindset. And I think identifying those areas and also, whether it's based on a certain experience or whatever, but having that process where you actually go through and identify why you feel that way and how it might be helpful to start thinking in different and better ways.
The way that greed often shows itself is not in the way that we think of it as being so negative.
Yeah.
The way that it shows up is when silver's up and everybody calls and goes, I want silver. And so everybody knows the key is to buy low and sell high. But emotionally, what greed looks like is everybody wants to buy when something's hot, it's in the news, their neighbor's talking about it, and they go, I should have bought more of that. You and I were talking about crypto the other day, and I personally have not invested in crypto, and people always assume because I manage hundreds of millions of dollars and I'm in wealth management that I'm going to be a crypto guy. And I'm like, man, for me, I invest.
Because of our age too, I think.
Yeah, and our age. But I would say I primarily invest in three things. I invest in our business, I invest in real estate, and then I invest in the stock market, but not even in an exciting way, boring mutual funds, ETFs. And so what I would say to that is that you need to know if what you're wanting to do is based on a good, intelligent decision or on an emotion. And the time to get in to an investment classification like silver or gold is not when it's at peak prices.
And I'll share a quick story. When I was in grad school, we had a professor and he was really bullish on silver. And this was in 2012. And it was trading, I think, right around $29 an ounce. I think a year later, it dipped significantly. But what I do know is in 2025, the big breakout year for silver spent the first half of the year trading between $30 and $36 an ounce. Mm-hmm. You're talking from 2012 all the way until 2025, where virtually there was no growth in silver. It wasn't until the tail end of the year where I think it went over $80 an ounce. And obviously everyone sees what's happening with it, today. But yeah, it's one of those things where if you're chasing those fad investments, sometimes it take a long time to actually gain anything. You'd be waiting for, nearly 15 years.
I think that one of the reasons that most people need a financial advisor, planner, or coach is because one of the things that you should have in every area of your life, not just your finances, is somebody that's an expert in that field to help you make quality decisions about the things that impact everything. And the thing I love about money is that if your money is in order, everything else in life is easier.
Right.
If your money's not in order, everything else in life is more difficult.
Doing the right thing sometimes sounds a little bit boring, right? Sometimes it's not about being the smartest person in the room, not about having the best stock picks, anything like that, but it's about being disciplined, right? And that's what we want to encourage people to do, because it's very easy to have a reactionary decision whenever you see the headlines, whenever you see, your favorite social media celebrity saying things with as much certainty as they possibly can. And the reality of it is, being disciplined, being consistent, and making probably what I would say is, without, I guess I can't think of the right word, but making a good, whenever you invest in a portfolio, it isn't necessarily one that's filled with gold, silver, crypto. Things like that are really popular today, but a diversified strategy that's designed for the long haul.
Yeah. And here's what I would say. If you're wondering how much risk should I have in my portfolio, one of the things you can do is you can reach out to us. We can do a risk analysis, but then you can say, I want 80% of my money safe. I want 10% diversified in X amount of things, and then I want 10 that's crypto or something that if it goes crazy, it helps. But if it falls, if it fails, then I'm still going to be stable. An
interesting fact, though, according to JP Morgan, they looked at the last 20 years, and you can do this with any periods in the market, but they looked at the last 20 years and they said, hey, if you missed out on 7 of the 10 best days. So they actually had an example where if you invested $10,000 on January 5th of 2000, in the year 2000 or 2001, and you invested all the way until December 31st of 2024, right, for a 20-year period. if you invested $10,000 and you stayed in the market the entire time, your $10,000 would be $71,000 over a 20-year period. Basically a 10% rate of return.
Yeah.
If you missed out on a handful of the best days, I think it's like the 10 best days, your return will be cut in half. Rather than $71,000, you'd have roughly, $35,000. And if you missed out on the 60 best days in the market, not only would you have less of a return, instead of $10,000, you basically would have about $4,000 in the market. Mm-hmm. So we often talk about making sure that it's not timing the market, but it's time in the market. I know it's kind of a silly cliche, but just to reiterate that, making good, disciplined decisions when it comes to your finances.
All right, money scripts, stories that people tell themselves. So I think one of the greatest things that you can do is you can figure out, is money a good word or is it kind of like a swear word? There's so many people that when you bring up the word money, it's almost like they shrink. And when I talk about money, I love it because money is such a powerful tool to do good things for good people. But I think your perspective of money really impacts your whole life. And so we've all heard a lot of people say, well, I work really hard for my money. So what I would say is when it comes to money, number one is I would ask you, would you have a positive or a negative response when people bring up the topic of money? The second thing I would ask is, why do you respond the way that you respond about money? And it's very likely it's because there hasn't been enough. There was fighting over it. They say the average marriage in America lasts 7 years. And the number one reason why they don't make it is because of a lack of finances or a lack of communication around money. One of the things I would inspire people or encourage people to do is I would say, what do you need to do to change your perspective of money? Yeah. Because if you can change the story that you tell yourself about money, the rest of your life will be less stressful. You'll have better communication and you'll make better financial decisions than if you continue to tell yourself that money's a scary thing, that money's a bad thing, that there's a lack of money. And one of the things that I appreciate is I grew up where my father would always say, so here I am, my late 30s, talking about what my dad would talk about when it related to money. He would say, when it comes to finances, you can either be disciplined and live your whole life 30 days ahead or 60 days ahead or a year ahead. But what most people do is they lack discipline and they literally spend their whole life 30 to 60 days behind. Yeah. And so one of the things I'd encourage you is if you've never gathered the discipline and the habits to live ahead and you've always been behind, do whatever it takes for 90 to 120 days to change your life. Dave Ramsey often says, live like no one else today so that you can live like almost no one else tomorrow.
And I think that's really important because sometimes the money scripts that we have, sometimes we inherit those. Sometimes it's because, we always associate money with debt, with not having enough, with scarcity, as we talked about. Yeah. And I think that if we were to redefine money, or at least have maybe one or two things that I know what I try to associate money with. I try to think of money as a reflection of the decisions that I've made. Right. Yeah. I put my time into this. I put my time into these various things. And the money that I have, there's a direct relationship between how I spend my time. But also, rather than looking at money as just like currency, as a means of paying for things, right? I try to look at it as this is what affords me other opportunities. I now have more options and more opportunities, and it's a reflection of the current choices I have been making and am continuing to make.
Very good.
What would you add to that, or how would you say, what would be a healthy way to think of money? And is there anything that you would say is absolutely unhealthy?
When it comes to money, here's what I would say. It sounds cheesy, or I don't know what the word the other people would use, but you need to get around people that have a healthy relationship with finances. So a lot of times when people come in and they have a bad relationship with money, it's because they've been surrounded by people that have a bad relationship with money. Yeah. And so it's kind of like if you want to get fit, a friend of mine, Pedro, is one of my best friends. And Pedro, it's one of your best friends. I'm just kidding. No, but here's what I love. I love
Pedro, by the way. Pedro, if you're listening, I love you.
No, he's one of my favorite people. But he and I actually had a negative impact on each other in college where, 3 days a week, we'd go, hey, tomorrow we're starting our diet. Let's get that Meat Lovers stuffed crust pizza one more time. And then we'd both laugh and then we'd order that pizza. But the reason I say that is half the time it was him, half the time it was me. So here we were in this cycle of not getting healthy and fit in one of our 4 years of college. And so what I would say is when it comes to money, a lot of people go, I have a bad perspective of money, but if I want a good perspective, I'm going to try to change it with the people around me. And you just can't. You got to get around people that already are making good, quality decisions. Just like if you want to get fit, you got to hang out with people that are fit, because what you're going to do is you're going to see they eat at different restaurants. They order different food.
Right.
They prioritize the workout instead of waiting to see if there's time of the day for the workout, and then it doesn't happen. And so when it comes to money, what I would just say is get around people that are winning with money. Ask to take them to lunch. Hey, can I pay? Don't ask to pay for their food, because people that have money, it's not impressive for you to buy their lunch. But just say, can I pay for your time to learn how you manage money, because I want to manage money well.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
One thing that kind of comes up in an immigrant situation, a lot of times immigrants, they think that debt is really bad. And I know it's not just unique to immigrants. But
right. They don't know the difference of good debt and bad debt.
Yeah, because it's all bad, right? Because of course, you're saving every dollar. We're doing everything ourselves. We're do-it-yourself people, and you're paying to borrow that money. So interest is considered bad. And then, debt kind of looks like failure, right? Because you weren't able to pay for it on your own. So I think that sometimes what happens is you have these traumatic experiences, whether it's credit card debt or always being behind, and you associate that with something like debt. And debt is always bad under all circumstances. And what I would say is don't take your instruction from the trauma in your life, but like you said, find people in your life who you can sit down with. You can actually learn how they've done it, because they've been successful with their finances.
My favorite thing, I think this is my favorite thing. It's definitely one of my favorite things about what we do.
I love how often you say something's your favorite thing.
Oh, man.
Man, you got a lot of favorites.
I got a lot of favorites. I have a friend the other day. He's a pastor, and his worship team, they did an album, and they had 4,000 people in the church sanctuary singing the songs, because they're recording them.
Yeah.
And the first song came on, and he looked back in the second row where I was with my few other friends, and he goes, "This is my favorite song."
Yeah.
And then the next song came on, and he goes, "Oh, you guys are going to love this." He goes, "This is my favorite song."
Yeah.
And then he said it like 4 times, and I looked at him and I said, "Hey," I said, "Jared, you're losing credibility." But here's what I think. When you're an optimist, you have a lot of favorites. So here's one of my favorites. So is when we put together a successful financial retirement plan, and somebody looks at me and they say, "Trey, I get it." And I go, "What do you mean you get it?" They go, "You're the first person that's ever put all of my investments, all of my insurance, all of my expenses in one program. No one's ever brought it all together." And they go, "I get it." And then this, and I love this because I know it's coming. They'll say, "This is the first time in my life I've ever had financial peace."
Yeah.
And you're like, we did that. Like, we created a plan that gave them a feeling and an emotion around money that they've never had.
Just happened.
Which is a positive feeling. So think about this. The average person that we work with is 65. People come in at as early as age 50. We've got people, actually our oldest client's 102 now. Isn't that amazing?
Crazy.
And so think how neat it is that we get to be in a business, that we have the tools, and that we have the experience and the education to put together a plan where, for many of the people that we serve, their mid-60s is the first time that money was a positive word, and we got to deliver on that.
It just happened just a couple of days ago on our trip, right?
Yep.
And I'm always surprised. I always think that people are just going to be so impressed with the investments and the investment plan we put together. But it's always like, wow, everything's all in one spot. And it's so organized, and I finally have a full picture of my finances, my income sources, my expenses. And it's that presentation that they seem to value more than the investments themselves.
Well, and if I could say this, if I could talk about our industry for a little bit, I think our industry is full of salespeople and not planners. And if you think about it this way, the financial services business is really designed kind of like real estate. It's designed around commissions. So let's say that you and Alicia are going to sell your home, and you hire a real estate agent, and you decide, I'm just going to throw out random numbers, that you're going to sell your house for $850,000, and you have a great meeting. But the realtor comes after 30 days and goes, "Hey, I think we need to reduce the cost of your house." And you go, "It's only been 30 days. And they go, "I know, but now is the time. We got to bring it down to 800,000. You might fight it, but then you go, "You're the professional. Let's bring it down to 800." Well, imagine that happens a few more times. Eventually, you're going to go, "Hey, we're not reducing the cost or the value of our house." And they go, "Well, we just need to get it sold, and you're missing the window." It makes you wonder, are they trying to get the home sold for you or for them?
Right.
Because they get paid either way. And a 6% commission on 850 or 650 or 7, whatever that number is still in the positives, where for you, every time you're reducing the price, you're losing money. Yeah. And so the reason I say that is a lot of financial advisors, I would say they're not advising in anything. They're selling. And so one of the things that I would consider is, do you have a salesperson or do you have what I would call as a planner and an advisor? Because what an advisor does is they give you advice based on your best interest, which we call that fiduciary model. And so that means that whether somebody is high risk or low risk, we get paid basically the same.
Right.
Whether somebody chooses to pick one investment or other, we get paid basically the same. So you need somebody in your life who the finances, the way they're getting paid is on your behalf versus a real estate agent, which by the way, we love real estate agents, but there are some that they're making decisions for them, not for the client.
Right. Yeah. To sum it up, I would say that retirement planning is much more than just looking at a pie chart. And I
100%.
think that's been the feedback we've received consistently year over year.
I would summarize what we do differently in a lot of ways, but one of them is this. Most financial advisors, their goal when a couple sits down and they talk about investments, taxes, insurance, is to show people how smart they are.
Right.
And it is not impressive to people to hear how smart you are, to make you feel like you know less about this industry or about finances than you thought you did. What people really want is to start building an understanding of everything they've done. Now, here's what's interesting. Statistics show that 85% of people are visual learners, and over 90% of financial advisors out there don't show anything visual. It's all auditory. So here they think people are leaving with peace and an understanding. People get in their cars and they go, do you have any idea what Tom said? And they look at each other and they have no idea. So here's what I would say to you is, if money has been a negative word, you need a great financial advisor who is what we would call a planner that is putting together a visual or a picture for you of what your future looks like instead of just telling you.
One other negative aspect of money that I find for many of our clients, of course, we always have the people who spend too much money, but we also have people who have anxiety about spending any money at all. And I would say that's also a negative thing too, because even people who can afford it, and maybe it's related to scarcity like we talked about before, but sometimes people have a challenge spending that money and they have anxiety related to that. How would you address that?
I think that the purpose of money is to give you peace and to advance our time on the earth. And so I think one of the things that I enjoy doing is not just helping people protect their money, but helping them enjoy what they work so hard for. And if you think about it, we've met with a ton of people, and we continue to, that they've trained themselves so well, they've been so disciplined with their finances that even though they plan on touching that money in their retirement, now when they get there, because they've created 40 years of habits of not touching it, they're never going to touch it, because what they've done is they've told themselves that the reward of not touching money is greater than the reward of enjoying the money. And what I would say is they have bought into a lie. And so one of the things that I love to help people with is say, hey, you should have money put aside. You should be a saver. You should be an investor. But what if you don't live into your 80s and you only have 6 months left? What if you do live into your 80s, and now instead of leaving 1, 2, 3, 4 million to your grandkids, you leave a couple $100,000 of that or half of that, but you and your wife got to live your best days creating dreams and memories that a lot of people never get access to because you were disciplined. So I would just say this, is that if you're a saver, an investor, and you're disciplined, don't forget your why. What is the why? The why is to have a great life. The why is to maximize the gifts and the talents that God's given us. And I would say that what we see a lot of people do is they do a good job being disciplined, but a poor job enjoying the journey.
Yeah.
And I think there's a balance. And I think what we do a really good job of saying is, hey, don't be foolish, don't be unwise, but why don't we build a life that you're proud of, that you're excited about?
So just thinking of our meeting from last week, whenever we organized everything in a way that they could see their entire full picture, I think to me, not only was there some relief, but it gave them relief in terms of giving them the permission to be able to spend it without having to worry.
100%.
And I think I've heard you say something like this where, it's not the purchase that's necessarily the problem. And maybe when you talk about margins and just budgeting in general, the purchase itself isn't the problem. It's the story that you tell yourself about the purchase.
Yeah.
And I think that you help people, basically rephrase that story or that money script, if you will, in a way that gives them that permission and also gives them the peace of mind because you do the planning in the background.
Well, it's kind of like we had a couple in a couple months ago, and they said, hey, our dream, actually it was the wife's dream. The husband's dream was to never spend any money. And she goes, my dream is to have a travel van. And they're expensive. I want to say it was like 130 grand for what they were looking at, which is a really nice one. And he was like, we're not buying a travel van. Yeah. And I said, well, let me show you guys something. I said, if you purchase the travel van based on the interest rate, if you borrow money and we keep money invested, you're going to end up giving your kids in 25 years, it was like $250,000 less than if you bought it. So it was like, you're going to give your kids $2 million instead of $2.25 million at 90 years old. What it did for him is it gave him peace that they were still going to leave something significant for the kids while he could bless his wife with something that was a dream for her. Yeah. And then what's so neat is after they went and did it, because what I think we did is we gave them permission to enjoy spending their own money without losing stability in the future. And then when they got it, guess who she emailed? Me, because I helped her get the van done. Yeah. And I love that because we didn't compromise to a point where he had to give up his security. He had to change his perspective of what secure was and see that, man, you've worked so hard for so long. And if you think about the average couple that retires at 65, you and I watch this, we say they have like this 10-year window, 65 to 75, that you have the go-go years. You're going to spend more, play more. But most of them, they end up slowing down really at 70 to 72. So they spend 40 some years working to enjoy a 5 to 7 year window. And yet some people, many people, never have somebody that comes alongside them like us, and they miss the 5 to 7 years that were supposed to be the best years of their life.
You know, I think what kind of speaks to this a little bit is there's a lot of behavioral science studies that talk about when people feel pain, it's twice as painful than when something good happens, right? So like they feel the weight of the loss, the weight of whatever just happened twice as much as they would if something positive happened in their lives. Yeah. And I think that sometimes reinforces some of these negative thoughts too about risk and money and all the things that we've been talking about.
Well, I think I'll end with a story on my end. So I've got a friend, and several years ago, he said, Trey, he said, the house that we're in is cramped. I've got my father-in-law living with us, which, by the way, he's like, it's terrible. He's like, I'm doing the will of God and I'm blessing my wife. And he's like, but we really need a house that has like what they call like a mother-in-law suite for his father-in-law. Yeah. And so I said to him, I said, man, you just need to buy the bigger house. I go, you've got one young kid. If you're going to have more kids, if you're going to enjoy having him in your home, you need a space that's his space with a separate kitchen and all the things, even if it's in a smaller area. And he goes, well, we just really love where we live. And I said, well, you guys should just believe that God brings the right house within a few blocks of you that has everything that you want. So I said, can we pray that? He goes, yeah, let's pray that. So we prayed for it. A couple weeks later, he calls me. He goes, hey, this house just popped up in my neighborhood. He goes, I didn't even know it was there because it's hidden behind some trees. It's the nicest house, and it has a mother-in-law suite. Nice. I go, that's your house. He goes, well, I'm going to go look at it. I go, you better go look at it. So he goes to look at it. Long story short, he calls me. He's like, I don't think I'm going to do it. I go, this is what we prayed for. And he goes, well, I better go back and look again. So he goes, with my pushing, they make an offer. And then what he does is he lists his house at a price that's so high that the realtor didn't even want to list it. The realtor goes, John, you'll never get this for your house. And he goes, well, if I get this, then I know that the God has the other house. So I just said to him, I said, you can't be an unreasonable person. Here you prayed that God would bring the right house within a few blocks. He does it in your neighborhood at a good price. I said, all you're doing is you're listing your house at a price so big that it's an excuse for you not to go through with it. And he ended up losing the house. What's sad is he could have bought it at a 2.6% interest rate. And now here we are 6 years later. Right. And rates are 5.85%. And not even that he can't go do it now because he could, but he missed, almost the last 6 years of living in a nicer house with a spot for his father-in-law because of the fear of what could happen if they bought a bigger house and one of them lost their job. Yeah. So I would just say that one of the things that you have to decide is, are you going to have an abundance mindset or a scarcity mindset? And it's not just making the decision, but it's when the decision comes to decide, would I rather be a little uncomfortable and stretch, use my faith, or do I just want to live a smaller life? And some people just choose the smaller life. I would just say, choose abundance.
I think that's a great place to end. I think it's been an awesome podcast. Sometimes it's, we want to have better and more fun and exciting answers, but really it comes down to discipline, consistency, rewriting those money scripts, thinking about things positively, and really turning to people that can help you make some of those decisions in your life.
Here's what I would end with. Consistency is the key to all long-term success. If you want to have an abundance mindset, get around other abundance people. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us. More things ahead with All Things Financial.
Advisory services are offered through CG Advisory Services, LLC, a registered investment advisor, and through Guardian Wealth Strategies, LLC, a registered investment advisor. CG Advisory Services, LLC, and Guardian Wealth Strategies, LLC, are separate and unaffiliated entities. The topics discussed on this podcast are for educational purposes only and are not intended to be investment advice or recommendations. Listeners should consult with their own financial professionals before making any investment decisions.